Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second of six workshops that GreenLeaders DC and the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences is doing on aligning skill sets in universities with with what the skill set needs are in the private sector. So today we're talking about social entrepreneurship. And our course leader today is Dave Feldman. He's from right around here in the Washington, D.C. area, and he's been working in this space for quite a long time. So without further delay, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to Dave so he can get us started with his presentation, and then we'll start our discussion on how we can best align the social entrepreneurship skill sets that are being taught in the universities with what's happening at the local and the community levels. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you. Everybody, here's Dave Feldman.
Good morning, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to pop this on and start our screen share here. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me pull this up here. The name of my presentation today is Growing Livable Communities, and I'll give you a little bit of background about that. So first, I'd like to thank you all for participating. I know we all have multiple choices of how to spend our day, and I'm glad, one, that you're interested in the topic, and two, that you're working toward a very important issue around sustainability. I hope you don't mind. I'd like to share a little bit about myself. I think that really plays into building sustainability in my community and my story about how I found this particular both profession and interest. These are my pictures. I'm into photography, and I've been somebody who's appreciated nature from a very young age. I actually grew up on a creek. I grew up actually 1.5 miles from Rachel Carson, who is a local hero in Montgomery County here, wrote the book Silent Spring. So perhaps it's in my DNA to be an environmentalist somewhere along the line. Ironically, though, I've got a background in business as well. As a kid, I always was involved in business. My dad owned a successful grocery, deli, beer, wine store down in Washington, D.C. I've got an MBA. I've just found myself in a lot of different kind of situations where business was very important, and I never really saw the two as mutually exclusive, which I'll share a little bit about. And my background was in the tech sector for a number of years. I did sales, marketing, business development, a whole range of activities, and I ended up back in early 2002 with a very fascinating job working at the British Embassy, head of their economic development department. And my goal was to help, in short, build and support the British economy. And what that means is creating jobs, helping U.S. companies that are looking for a presence overseas into the U.K., and in the other way, bringing U.K. business into the U.S. And there's a few things that I saw that really started to shape my visions of how communities work together. Bottom right-hand picture is windmills. There are a lot of them over in the UK. There are a lot in Europe. There are a lot in a lot of places, and not so many in the US. And I started asking questions about why some places invest in certain kinds of infrastructure and why other places don't. What's the strategic process or the values that groups make to build what I would consider viable and healthy communities. And if you look at the bottom left-hand side, this is a very cool pod that at the end of the day, that gentleman closes it up, and it's a co-working space. But each person has a little pod, so it's kind of innovative in its own way. So I started off on this quest, and my quest took me through a lot of reading and trying to figure out why do some communities do certain things that other communities, and what do communities want their long-term strategies to be for the people that are part of those communities. And I read a fascinating book called Suburban Nation, which contrasts livable communities that are higher dense, more urban in their approach to kind of your more sprawl-like communities, which unfortunately has been our development for quite a few years right now. I read a book that really changed my life because I was in the world of economic development. And E.F. Schumacher wrote a book, and this is quite an old book. This is actually in the early 70s, called Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. So it's talking about small businesses. It's not talking about the typical way we're trying to grow consumer-oriented societies. It's saying we need to look at things more holistically, and in some ways, small makes better sense in what we're trying to do. And then the last thing that happened, and it's not really the last, but the last on this slide at least, is I had a great opportunity to work with Ashoka, which is a social entrepreneur institute where they create fellows around the world who are creating change. And they were opening up offices in the UK, and I had a chance to work with them. And I really gravitated towards the model of what they were trying to create, which is this empowerment of people who want to make a change, but do it through the eyes of business. So these three ideas were really resonating with me, and I said, well, wait a minute. If there are already really good things going on, then maybe we can take it to this book, which is kind of the one that pulled it all together, to a tipping point. So if little things can make a big difference, how can we take sustainability and scale it up? So I applied that to my world, which was economic development, creating green jobs, working to promote and grow sustainable products and services, which is the goal of economic development. And then something that is quite atypical is when one community gets it right, how do they share it in a collaborative way with other communities? And that's not necessarily the nature of development agencies. It's really about attracting jobs and focusing on their region. Ended up finding a wonderful lady who is my business partner. She is based on the West Coast in Santa Rosa and has been a sustainability entrepreneur for a number of years. These are a couple of her ventures I think are quite interesting. She designed a permaculture facility that is still today a living education garden in Pacifica, California. She had a yoga studio. She's created a whole series of films and did a whole series of films workshops and created films and discussion kits, and had a biodiesel production facility. So this is one of the things. And we decided to pool our efforts. And we came up with an idea to create physical spaces where these kinds of sustainability initiatives can take place. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We actually tried to get one launched in California. We couldn't quite get the economics to work. But what we did find is when I came back to the home where I live, which is in Bethesda, Maryland, two individuals, a council member and a businessman, came up with an idea of greening Bethesda, and they ended up hiring me. I became its executive director, and we set up this wonderful 4,000 square foot facility to bring all the sustainability initiatives together in the region and help scale them in a way that benefited multiple types of groups. So strange, the logo didn't turn out as I converted it to PDF, but you'll see a little bit more of that. So that group is called Bethesda Green. So enough about me. I've got a lot of content I want to share. What is it that we're going to talk about for today that I hope that we'll get out of this conversation? And Lauren had requested to keep the presentation to somewhere around 20 to 20 plus, minutes or so, and then we'll go into some Q&A. So the three areas that I want to cover are the challenges that we find in creating sustainable communities. What is it that we seem to not being able to overcome well? There's a model which you may be familiar with called a collective impact model, and how does that apply to systemic change as well as to sustainable communities? And the third is some ideas, concepts, strategies on how to accelerate your community to transition. It's a weird word you hear a lot in our space, to a sustainable and more prosperous economy. So the three biggest challenges, and I define this in three different categories. These are the folks that I seem to work with. Community leaders, and I see community leaders as people in government, in business, in academia, in large nonprofits. They're the ones out there who have the wherewithal and the capacity to make these changes. I also see it, and Lauren mentioned it earlier, as a social entrepreneur. These are the risk takers of the world, the ones who are out there. I would use Lauren as an example, who has an idea and a vision of what he wants to create, and he's decided he wants to make a business out of it. And it has both the social good and the need to make a living out of it as well. Not always easy. And the last tends to be more sustainability professionals. And Yen-Chun, as you and others in academia are helping develop the next generation of students, many of these are taking courses that are going to be sustainability professionals. So the first real challenge I see is just raising awareness of what is sustainability. It's so many things, and in many respects it's kind of confusing. There's many different definitions. People debate the word. It's not a single definition, and it's also quite big. So there's so many things that it covers at any one time. The biggest challenge I think sustainability has is become quite political, and we all face that with the word climate change, for example. I mean, it's fascinating to me that Florida recently has banned the use of that word for other government employees. So it has become something that has become perceived as something that's not good for the economy, not good for businesses. And I spend a lot of time working with different folks making a case that, you know, green sustainability is not a political issue. It is something that really affects us all, and we need to find a nomenclature to describe it in a way that's much more engaging. That's a whole different story. So that concept of sustainability is big. Second of all is, even for those people who do get it and move beyond this complexity and the bigness, and those who've studied a lot, sometimes it's really hard to get started. And when I say started, it's hard to make that kind of impactful change that really needs to be made a difference right now. I had an electric vehicle, for example. The infrastructure wasn't in place, so I was very limited to where I could drive it, which was fine because I didn't have that far to go. I was working locally. But there's many situations where infrastructure is not in place to scale up the sustainability. And that could be supply chains, that could be physical infrastructure, that could be financial infrastructure. The other thing is that there's often a lack of instructions. So what might work in Seattle might not work in Washington, D.C., or what might work in one neighborhood might not work in another. So there's really not a lot of templates on how to address some of the big challenges we have on a broad scale, especially based on a lot of past historic data. It's out there, but it's certainly not always easily and readily available. And those that do find that, and even when they do have instructions, this is just the nature of being an entrepreneur or university. It's capital. It's certain kinds of resources, whether it's skilled individuals or the financial resources to help set these things started. So I meet many different folks in my work who have absolutely wonderful ideas, and a lot of them are constrained because they're missing a certain piece of that, and certainly those are resources. And the third part, I think, is actually quite significant. It might actually even be the biggest one, is even if you did have the resources and there was the awareness out there, it takes a larger group to create this kind of a change. Sometimes you find that some of the folks don't even agree to what the change is, and you know, business and government and nonprofits, as an example, often speak very different languages. They might not have the same way of looking at the world. So if you're not getting them looking at the ideas in the same way, it's really quite difficult. So one of the challenges is, how do you create something where everyone's, you know, everyone talked about, when Kennedy talked about getting man to the moon, there was a rallying cry to create something significant. There was a common agenda. And by all means, everybody looked at their jobs and said, we're going to point in that general direction. Often insufficient support, and that goes back to lack of resources, but it also goes back to, even when there is resources, sometimes those resources aren't applied to certain types of causes. Economic development agencies focus on job creation, but sometimes job creation and sustainable communities do go hand in hand, but they don't necessarily make that connection, so they're not willing to make the investment to support different kinds of initiatives. And that leads to the big one, which is collaboration. And you're seeing a lot more with technology now and ways of collaborating. So until we figure out a ways that we can start building up these groups that break down geographic, functional barriers, we're still going to struggle to make a broad sweeping kind of a change. So I actually didn't know this concept when I first started doing work in sustainability, and I'll share a little bit about that. But collective impact is something that I have come across, and it is well worth reading and learning about that, that basic concept. It was started, for the most part, by an organization in 2010 that wrote an article, and it's online, by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And essentially it talks about the need to change a system, whether it's education, healthcare, or the environment, by engaging all sectors of the community. And you don't see a lot of board of directors, for example, of organizations that have that broadness around it. And just bringing them together doesn't always mean that you're going to have them work together, but you create that common agenda. So the common agenda is really the first step toward creating a collective impact, or something that changes significantly. Differences are addressed, they're resolved. You come up with something, and they can be very high level, but at least people fundamentally agree to a theme. The next step is, once you agree to that theme, then you want to create what I would call a shared measurement. So these are multiple indicators of how you know that they're successful. It could be number of people who come to your website or attend events, or in the case of Bethesda Green, which I'll share as a case study, how many metric tons of recyclable materials do we take out of the mainstream? So those measurements are important because they let all the different stakeholders know that you're working toward a common goal and sharing something, and you can see and visually identify success. Your activities need to reinforce that as well. So when you bring together a variety of groups of individuals, they don't necessarily do the same thing. So for example, businesses often get involved in taking sustainability ideas back into their businesses, or they will fund various initiatives, or they will champion it through volunteer programs in a variety of different ways. Governments may not have the funds available, but they have the wherewithal to change policies. Or we had a big event, they actually closed the streets for us. They served a certain role. They were an active voice. And even nonprofits have a role where they can help promote things and share in resources and combine their mission. So again, there's a different role for each of those that don't need to do the same thing. Communications, just an example. This allows a culture of collaboration, and it takes some time for different people to speak the same language. When we first started our organization, Bethesda Green, the Chamber of Commerce said, we don't really support environmental groups because you may not have the same agenda as us. But over a year of them understanding that we are about building a better community, they wanted to participate with our work. So it was ongoing communications in both directions to allow us to structure a strong relationship that they recognized that their interests would be treated fairly. And the last one is the most important one, and it's what I would call a backbone organization. So if you're putting all these people together in a room, they all do what they do. Businesses are in business, universities serve students. A backbone organization says sustainability, or whatever else is the issue, is the objective, and we're going to work with each of these stakeholders to make sure that they have what they need in order to become successful. So what does that look like in real practice? Let me go down to here. Oops. I had an opportunity back in 2008 to start an organization called Bethesda Green. Bethesda is a very vibrant community. It's a very walkable area with lots of restaurants, farmers markets, lots of bike trails, very affluent, and National Institutes of Health is headquartered there. It's quite a unique place with a very progressive thinking group of people. But there are some significant challenges as well. And some of those challenges included transportation, a lot of congestion, a huge amount of development right now. There's not a lot of recycling and things like that. So it's a very urban area with some urban challenges. So we created our collective impact model around creating a hub that brings business, government, and residents together. So we called out who we wanted to be participating in this to promote a sustainable living practices, build a healthy economy, and reduce our collective impact on the environment. Ironically, we came up with that name, collective impact on the environment, even before we knew the idea of collective impact. And we were going to do that three ways: incubating new businesses and ideas, educating the community on the broadness of all sustainability and what they could do about it, and then actually facilitating implementation. So working with groups that were already doing projects and being part of that process and bringing together those resources because we've brought them all together under one umbrella. So we built a group of 17 individuals as a board who all agreed with this, who are leaders in the community who said, you know what, we can do this. This isn't political, this isn't complicated, this supports the long-term goals of the organization, but also more importantly, Bethesda, Maryland. Here's a smattering list of our programs, and you can get this more on our website. It's BethesdaGreen.org. But we did a Fields of Green internship fair. So we work with the universities to help students who are looking to get into the field of sustainability by bringing together all the companies and organizations and nonprofits and governments that were offering services and looking for jobs. So we connected them. We were a facilitator. We did a Solar and Green Home Expo, again facilitating and helping vendors and financiers and educators with people who were potential consumers of these products. We did an awards gala recognizing champions so we could showcase good things that were happening in our area. Farm to Table, greening condo associations and neighborhoods are like working groups that every month come together and they share best practices and ideas, and we bring in guest speakers. We've launched, which hasn't grown as quickly as I would have liked, but it's greening restaurants. We've helped procure recycling bins all throughout Bethesda, which is quite exciting because we didn't ever have them in public spaces before. But we put together a public-private partnership with different individuals to give them the opportunity to sponsor these bins and then collect trash in the neighborhood. And we've collected, I think it's like 14,000 pounds a year from 35 bins. So that's just one metric, an example. And we were very involved in getting bike racks and other sustainable transportation in the community. But what we're most well known for, I just have a separate slide here, is our business incubator. We were given 4,000 square feet. We've converted it into a green space. And we realize that small businesses need a lot of support in general. And even when you're socially minded, it's even a little bit more, it seems, because you now have a stronger agenda to do well. So we provide all sorts of support services, space, training, mentoring, and I think the important thing is that we also help create a market for them. So as we're educating our communities on the value of sustainability, these companies now have a much more open and receptive group to buy those products. A real quick visual of economics. So I left the organization at the end of or middle of July 2014. I was the founding director, but my interest is helping take a model and scale this up to other communities. And when I left, this was at the end of 2013. Part of the model is creating a viable, sustainable organization, and we felt that it could only be done based on multiple revenue streams. So you see on the right-hand side, 24% is just general sponsors. Those are corporations and other groups. And then we have events and programs at 19%. So we've got, a pretty significant percent is what I would call, engaged business community and others who are supporting the initiatives that you've created. 11% is more of event income, so those are attendees. 15% on the left-hand side in blue, that's individuals, so that's donations, so we are a nonprofit. 8% was local government, so we got some grants, and then 19% was for incubator rent. And what that's all about is earned revenue for companies that were paying for the services that we were providing. So we learned a lot. And I could go on for a lot to even give more specifics, but I wanted to give you 7 takeaways of what we got from this organization. One is flexibility is really important. These things are very difficult. We would change things on a regular basis, our corporate structure, our model. If somebody showed up and was a videographer, for example, and they wanted to participate, we would find a role for them to participate. We would have them shoot video for us to help educate different stakeholders. So we were very open to whoever would show up and wanted to participate. The local was very important. And as much as we want to change sustainability, we see the problems at all levels, state, local, and international. It really takes an engaged process to get the people at the local communities involved and work with them where they are. And over time, we talk about that as they start to understand this, that increases market demand. So the local engagement has a lot of different benefits, but it's the way that it needs to work. And that's why we like having these hubs address these kinds of issues and participation at a local level. And that's why a physical building was also very successful. Our broad focus was its strength. So we did talk about sustainability in broad terms, and we were not trying to narrow it down because those are big issues, and we want to address them all simultaneously. I've already mentioned private sector role. They were big funders, and they were just very active from the outset. Sometimes it's hard to engage business in environmental issues, but if it works, it has such an incredible multiplier effect. Creative opportunities for financing. That's not just for Bethesda Green as the nonprofit, as a 501c3. It's also for all the other solutions and organizations that we're working with. So, people invest because they want a return on investment. We need to find ways to show that the money of sustainability makes sense. Unfortunately, it's not good enough just to say environmental issues are good for the sake of the environment. We need to tie it to something economic. Strategic partnerships, left and right. We work with universities on many different levels, economic development agencies. I mentioned a videographer, other NGOs, very important. It was very clear when we set up a relationship that we would be clear on what the expectations are, that we would make it a win-win relationship. But again, flexibility was ingrained into it, so it evolved over time. And then the last one, there's different ways of structuring a Bethesda Green-like entity. Nonprofit was good because communities were willing to give to an organization that they saw serving the needs of the community. So one last slide. As I mentioned, I've left Bethesda Green. My work right now tends to be more regionally focused. There are actually a number of other hubs in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland region. I did a 3-day workshop last year. They all agreed at the end of that workshop that they wanted to stay together and work together as a team. So we're playing with this concept called the Sustainability Mid-Atlantic Cluster. So it does a lot of what you just heard about through Bethesda Green, but it's now doing it a lot more regionally. And my partner is actually doing something similar on the West Coast. And if you can look over here where the other stars are, there's other groups right now doing clusters in other regions. I don't know if everyone on the call has one of these, but there's a group up in the Cleveland, Ohio area. There's another one up in Indianapolis. This one down the left is South Carolina. There's an individual who's actually helping launch these clusters, and he's getting funded to create a business model and work with local government officials and universities as well. So I can share more on that. It's actually, you can look up Strategic Innovation Lab at Case Western University. A gentleman named Puck Mickleby is leading that charge. So we are connected to a bigger picture happening as well. And this is just a little slide of who I am and my organization, what we're doing right now. We provide education. We do a lot of connections, workshops. We're doing a lot of regional branding for sustainability and a whole range of other topics that I can share later. So I kept it pretty close to my time. I think I went a little bit over, but I wanted to cover that, and I'm open to any questions or comments.
Okay, great. Dave, thanks a lot for that. Social entrepreneurship, I think, is very, very important, particularly, I think, for students, as they're in school right now and they're looking for their career paths. The studies that have come out of student attitudes when they're going into college, I believe the number is somewhere around 65 or 70% of students when they're coming out of high school and going into college and looking for careers say that they are interested and it is important to them to work for a company that values sustainability. Now, sustainability, like you said, is a lot of times it's a very complex subject to try to tackle, and especially to try to teach as well. So, because there are so many different facets to it. So, what I'd like to do now, right now, is get a little bit of feedback from a faculty member, and Yin Chu is from the West Coast in Washington. How are you doing today? How's the weather out there in Washington? I think she's there. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, it's good. Yeah, we have nice spring weather today.
Okay, we have nice rainy weather. It's actually more like Seattle weather here in Washington, in fact. So, Washington, D.C. versus Washington State. What I'd like to do is I'm going to, just to kind of get our discussion started, I'm going to bring up a slide from Dave's presentation, which talks about the lessons. And, you know, these 7 lessons, I believe, cover pretty well the different skill sets and sustainability. So, Yin Chu, looking at this list right now, and based on the type of teaching that you're doing within the sustainability space, when I look at the first one, for example, flexibility is ingrained in culture. I mean, is this something, the notion of flexibility, that you are teaching in your courses right now, or what are some of the other skills that you see right there that you think would be really important in your teaching focus?
I think, of course, all of this are very important in our teaching. Just we really want to, I guess that students really want to know what are some of the specific skills they can apply after school to their work in workforce in the real world. So I think this is definitely a nice list of skills that I will definitely want to focus. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and I'm particularly intrigued by the second one, like local focus. Really is the important point like we want to emphasize in sustainability, because it's something like we want to, for example, the example Dave gave us is that you want to source locally, you want to serve your customers also locally. That's not just something that's good for local businesses, it's also like we are reducing our overall ecological footprint, so we do not source our materials from a faraway distance, which really increase our ecological footprint really hugely. So that's something I think is very important, and also that kind of stand out from the list of 7 items I really want to stress.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Dave, let me kind of jump back to you really quick. You have seen a lot of students and interns, you know, particularly through Bethesda Green's intern fair every year. What are some of the skills and the skill sets that you think they are strongest at when they come into those programs? And also, what are the skill sets you think that they're weakest at that maybe could be addressed in a teaching environment?
It's an interesting question.
And I'll pull up the list again just for reference.
Yeah, so first I want to reiterate what Yen Chun was talking about, because I think she's quite right about the need for local. There's many benefits about local. One is that people would get engaged when it's their community, but there are also a number of environmental benefits as well. And you're talking about, she's mentioned local sourcing. You know, there's, with food, for example, there's a whole need to kind of recreate supply chains for food because we don't have them in place anymore. We've gone to a very large industrial size. So, you know, in a lot of ways, these kinds of hubs that we're talking about are rebuilding some of the infrastructure from ground up, and it takes a lot of folks to do that. And it can only happen locally because, as I said earlier, each place has a unique set of needs. So I appreciate her comments. Local is very important. Regarding the students, we've had a lot of success and really enjoyed working with a lot of the students. I spoke a little bit about the Fields of Green internship fair. And, you know, I think it's quite funny when we have this event, you know, I come in and I'm not dressed uncasually right now, but, you know, we would come in and we're kind of a casual professional even for Washington, D.C. These students would come in and most of the students, almost to a T, the young men all had ties and suits on, and the young ladies were dressed up and they were handing out resumes. And they really took this job search seriously. It was really exciting to see that. And, you know, part of it I give attributes to the universities for promoting this. But there's a young generation who I think understands the challenge of the job market right now. It is a very difficult market from when we were growing up, or at least my period. And I think they're going to have to work a little bit harder in some ways, especially because some of the jobs that they're looking for probably don't even exist right now. So in other words, the job market will be very different in 10 years than it is right now. So I think the students right now are looking for any kind of opportunity. They're learning about professionalism. They're excited. I think having a set of sustainability skills is very important. And it goes back to one of the earlier slides, broad. So that doesn't just mean broad: food, energy, water. That means science, business, writing, critical thinking, and so forth are very important things. And I think we see a lot of very good students coming in. I'm not going to make a judgment on the overall students. I don't know, but the ones that are finding our organizations are really top notch. I think they have really gone above and beyond. They're willing to volunteer. They like to participate in things. They're very open, to whatever you suggest. They need to get practical experience. From a weakness area, it's very, very different. I don't want to show my age here, but I'm not. The social media, the cultural differences of the millennials and the younger students are quite different, and they operate quite differently now with using handheld devices and others. So I'm not going to say it's a weakness. I'm just going to say it's very different than the methodology that I grew up with, and I think it's really important to bring those kind of skill sets. That they bring something very valuable to the equation, but it's not necessarily what a lot of businesses and organizations think right now. So sometimes there's a disconnect with where the younger folks are and the needs of the existing workforce.
Right. That reminds me of a Wall Street Journal article. I said that one of the biggest complaints that employers have is within the communication with the millennials. They said, if you have something to say, just call me on the phone and say it. You don't have to email or text or anything like that. Let's just talk to each other. So that's one of the things. And we have to realize, of course, that for their generation, that they're digital natives, and those types of technologies are second nature. That's almost like having a conversation, as maybe older generations would conceive of it. Using text. One of the things you talked about was food and supply chains, and That reminds me of the food, water, energy nexus, and that I think is a very good example of the holistic nature of the sustainability challenge, and also of the skill sets and the critical thinking skill sets that are needed to address those things. So if you look at food as an example, and you look at the food, water, energy nexus, there are so many different ways to approach that from a sustainability point of view in terms of natural capital, water usage, the dependence on a fossil fuel driven infrastructure for transportation, the impact of the retail and the consumers, and food wastage, and all this stuff. So let me jump back to Yin Chu and ask you about teaching holistic skill sets. Is that a challenge that you find in your curriculum? And would, for example, seeing case studies and having private sector speakers like Dave come in and talk to some of your students about how those things work in practice on the ground, would that be helpful to you? And again, what are some of the skill sets that you teach that get towards that holistic nature of sustainability?
I think it's.
You froze there. Try again.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I think in environmental studies, and also when dealing with any kind of environmental topic, we really emphasize the interdisciplinary skill set. And sometimes interdisciplinary is really like wide-ranging. You need to have skills that we are good at talking to people. You need to have skills that you can synthesize very complex scientific data and information. You need to have the skills that you can actually analyze even more complex social dimensions of topics and factors. So when we teach students those different analytical skills and techniques, they sometimes feel that it's very overwhelming. They feel like the real world is actually much messier than they are able to comprehend. And I think it's a challenge, but it's also something that we want students to have the ability to deal with. We want to show them that the real world, when we are dealing with a real case, there are so many other messy dimensions or messy things that you need to sort out. Any case is not clearly laid out. You need to have the ability to comprehend those different sources of information. So I definitely see that as a challenge from the teaching end and also from the receiving end. Students sometimes feel like they are lost. They don't know how to start with they don't know where to start when dealing with those complex situations. But I also think it's a nice way to actually present the complexity to the student to begin with, so they start to grapple around this challenge in their head. And we definitely, like Dave mentioned, that the students are really, really good. When you present some challenge to them, they have the ability to really take it out and then come up with some innovative ways to address those issues. Yeah.
Okay, great. Dave, let me ask you about this. I mean, that seems to me to go to the first lesson on your slide here, which is flexibility is ingrained in culture. And, you know, like we just said, I mean, sustainability can be quite a messy type of, you know, subject to teach and also to practice as well. And I think you got, you know, a very good point there in that, you know, you have lots of different stakeholders and lots of different interests that come into this, especially when you're trying to convince people that, you know, sustainability is indeed a smart business opportunity and it's enlightened self-interest. So flexibility is ingrained in culture. And how would you respond or maybe even counsel people who were trying to teach that from your experience? How do you deal with that, you know, messiness of, you know, dealing with sustainability?
Well, you know, I will draw on other words sometimes that people will be able to appreciate, and you know, I consider myself a businessman. I mean, I'm in business. I'm an entrepreneur. So when you talk about innovation, you know, that is about flexibility. You know, you're innovating. You don't know what the outcome is because it hasn't been created yet. So in many respects, you're talking about flexibility as tying it to change. You know, so as you go through change, you don't always know the outcomes, and even if you do know the outcomes, sometimes it's not a pretty process in getting there. So we work with people. We try to tell them that these things that are difficult are the norm. That, you know, problems aren't a bad thing necessarily. Problems are, you know, something to be overcome to get to the next step. You know, again, those are sometimes very small business metaphors. People can understand that. You know, somebody used me, gave me an example one time, which I really quite like. So when we start a new program or do something different, we love to use the word, it's a pilot. Because when it's a pilot, then all of a sudden everyone steps back and say, okay, we are appreciating its flexibility. We're not calling it, we don't have to have it right the first time. We know that the idea is about gaining lessons learned throughout the process, and it takes some pressures off. So, you know, we do try to emphasize the need for appreciating process and change. You know, it's some of the big things that we have right now with our systems right now, our water systems right now. You know, you mentioned water and food. You look at what's going on in California. These are years and years and years of certain behaviors that have led to this situation. For us to now go into and start addressing them, it's going to require some pain, and a lot of people are going to have to do things very differently than they have. You're going to have to call on a virtue of flexibility in order to do that. So, you know, we just talk them through it. It's just, you just kind of reiterate that, and some people are more comfortable than others, but it's just part of the process.
Okay, great. That's right. You could consider sustainability itself as one giant pilot program. You know, if you look at, you know, for example, what's happening with the energy industry, what seems to me is that solar is finally reaching a tipping point where the economics are now in its favor. And so you're going to start to see a lot of different changes in how people source and use their energy from a distributed point of view. So I think that's a very interesting space to watch.
Lauren, that's a wonderful way of saying that. It goes with one of my expressions, you know, because as you're trying these things, you know, and whether it's Bethesda Green or us as a community, we're always in a beta. You know, we're always in a period because you know what? The circumstances and the conditions are constantly changing. So sustainability, there's no endpoint. It's constantly moving to address the needs that are present at that moment.
Okay, absolutely. And Yinchu, you're in a part of the country where innovation is, you know, it's almost a byword in that area of the country because of all the technology that has come out of there. So, let me ask you about that. The creativity and the innovation and thinking outside the box. I mean, those are all, you know, really buzzwords. But are those things that you concentrate on in your curriculum and that you encourage your students to kind of embrace that? that almost confusion that sometimes comes along with trying to create and innovate with new things?
Sure, I guess like it really depends on students at different stages. So when they are freshman year, they just got into the university. We really want to kind of deliver the very fundamental knowledge and skill set to them. So in that stage, it's more guided. We want to make sure the students have the basic foundations in terms of what they can understand about the environmental and social issues. And then when we move forward to more advanced level classes, we definitely emphasize this, like here are some cases that you can go out and find more information about and try to come up with some innovative solutions to address their issues. So a lot of our curriculums that we actually team the students up with some real cases, that real there's like a real client in their research, in their group project. So like some of the example I shared earlier, we have a sustainability studio class where each quarter we have a theme. So in the past, students work with the student housing and food services I remember there's a project, they started a community garden in the university dorms, and they actually were able, now they are able to sell some of those food produce back to the housing services, and they will prepare the food for those kind of locally sourced food at our student cafe and also student restaurants. So that's one project that students did in the past. And we also kind of like the athletic department, they really want to kind of jump into the green bandwagon, try to make the stadiums and also the facilities more green to begin with. So we have a semester that we team up with the student athlete department. One way to also to get the athlete to be interested in environmental topic, and the other way is really to improve their efficiency, like changing the light bulbs and changing the efficiency setting at those stadiums. So each quarter for that particular course, we actually team up with the actual client, and then students, at the beginning of the quarter, they learn some basic skill sets about how do you do those analysis, and then they need to present their final report to their client. So I think that's a nice way to design a course for the upper level students, that they are able to bring what they learned from the previous foundational courses and then apply those to actual cases. Students enjoy them, and also the clients are very appreciative.
What are some of the important things they need to know when seeking financing?
You know, there's a term that is often tossed around right now in the business world, and it's pretty common. It's just the value proposition. And a value proposition, I wish I had my document in front of me. It's a good question, but it's essentially understanding who is your customer and what value that you're providing them in engaging in your services. And sometimes value isn't necessarily, it's economic, but it's also an emotional thing. I'm saving you time, I'm reducing pain, I'm giving you happiness, you know, people make decisions based on emotion. In a lot of ways, it's really about, you know, if you're providing somebody a service, you have to understand what it is that drives them to make a financial decision. There is a certain sector of the population that will do it based on an altruistic perspective. They want to make a difference in the world. Other people, as you mentioned, Lauren, are looking for a return on investment as well. And, you know, I think in the green, you know, people talk about sustainability being a lot more expensive. It ranges. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes a lot more, sometimes it's not more at all, especially when you start evaluating a variety of different metrics. You know, if you start looking at externalities, for example, that changes the whole economic equation. So I would encourage people to really start to understand how to present those kinds of things to customers, investors, anybody that you're doing business with. And, you know, part of that process is asking questions, because no two people are the same, so what drives one person may not drive someone else. And understand what are their critical decision points. Just a good reference, there is a concept that startups use called the lean startup, and there's a business canvas model which breaks it into 9 different boxes about how to build a business or a program that meets the needs of a customer. And the key areas are defining your customer very clearly and identifying what's that proposition and what are you delivering that customer. And then everything else is about how you deliver it to them, what they get, who are the partners you need, revenue, cost, and so forth. So it's a wonderful way of looking at the world. Most small businesses are doing it now. Understand your customer, and your customer can be a broad array of people.
Okay, great. Yinchu, any
word.
Your final word? Okay, that's great.
No,
Yinchu, do you have a final word? Oh, you have a final word?
No, I was saying that know your customer is the final word, but there's always a final word after the final word.
Of course. All right. Yinchu, let me ask you for your final word now. Do you have any additional comments or questions for Dave?
I just feel it's really important that we are bringing business and the green thinking together, because in the past we always used to think about environment and economy as opposite. And students, in my experience, they also, before knowing too much about environmental study, they also have that kind of false dichotomy in their mind. There's no way that you can bring the environment and the economy together. So I really appreciate people like Dave and other people, like you are really trying to bring those two ends into a holistic whole. So it's really important. Like even people in the business, I think you have very good ideas and really good thinking that we can bring this together and also move us forward. Yeah, we cannot just have the economy. Nor can we only have the environment. So I really think it's a very important way to move us forward on sustainability.
Yes.
Well, great. I can't think of a better final word than that. What can I say? I couldn't agree more. Choosing between environment and the economy, it's a false choice. You have to have both in very healthy states. Otherwise, it's, again, all bets are off. So anyway, I'd like to thank our panelists and Dave especially, and also Yinchu for joining us from sunny Washington State, while we are here in rainy Washington D.C. It seems like it should be opposite, but it's not. Anyway, Dave, thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for your presentation. Work you're doing is great, and again, thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Larry. Thanks, Yanshu, and thanks everyone else who's out there in internet land.
Okay, and you'll be seeing us more. Of course, we'll be having the recording, and I'll be dividing this presentation up into little learning vignettes that we can use on Twitter and on Facebook as well. So those will be going out over the next couple of weeks. So great. Thank you for joining us, everybody. All of you that are watching on the broadcast, thank you for joining as well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.